Right, 45 auto versus 357 Magnum. Are they still relevant in today's world? Um, I'm going to try to answer that the best I can. And, they're still around, so I would say they're still popular. But are they popular from nostalgia standpoint, or are they actually pretty effective? And let's go back over 100 years and talk about the history really quick of these. Right around the turn of the century, here I got 38 Special, Philippine-American War, right around 1900, they found that the 38 long Colt ammunition of the time of the day wasn't stopping these charging moral warriors. They had strong shields, they were hopped up on narcotics, and the 38 long Colt wasn't doing the job. So they found out in the field in that war that what was most effective was the 45 long Colt. It was way more effective than the 38 long Colt. So out of that war, they developed the 38 Special, which was a Magnum version of the 38 long Colt. And they also started to issue soldiers double action 45 long Colts. But right around that time, the Army was looking for a better cartridge, and they wanted to do an automatic pistol, semi-automatic pistol. And they wanted something that was going to be a 45 caliber, because they realized that in that conflict, the 45 long Colt was doing a lot better job than the 38 long Colt. So they wanted a minimum of 45 caliber. And right around that time, you had John Moses Browning, you had some other people putting their hand in this thing. And there's already a 41 caliber automatic pistol cartridge in development around 1904. And the Army asked them to change that to 45 caliber. So that's essentially where the 45 ACP came from. In the original loading, they tested out a lot of different loadings. I think the original was a 200 grain bullet at 900 feet per second. They realized that really wasn't working quite well. I don't think the bullet was stabilizing quite right at the time. So they went with a 230 grain at 850. That gives you right around, 360, 365 foot-pounds energy, something like that. And the 38 Special came out as well, but the military didn't want a revolver cartridge anymore, and this really wasn't what they were looking for. So this went kind of on to police use. So this is where the 45 came from. And you had a lot of different gun makers at the time, trying to get the contract for this 45 auto cartridge. You had Luger, that they withdrew from the testing, and then you had another company, I can't remember who it was. They tried to create, I think it was Savage, they tried to create a pistol for the 45, and it just malfunctioned really, really bad. The Colt's 1911, as much as you hear nowadays where they malfunction a lot, well, actually it had no malfunctions through a pretty strenuous test. So the 1911 and the 45 completely passed the military test. It was very reliable. So that's where you get the 45. Now 357 Magnum, in police use, was around from around 1900 to, well, it went for much longer than that, but around 1934, I believe it was, or maybe even slightly before that, we started to get Magnum versions of the 38 Special, and we called those the 38, I can't remember what they're called, but they were basically a Magnum version of the 38. And what you had to do to fire something like that is you had to get a 44 Special frame, and you had to put a 38 caliber barrel and cylinders on it, so that frame was strong enough to shoot these really, really, really hot plus 38s. So essentially that led to the development of the 357 Magnum, because they just went from the ground up with a big end frame revolver and just made the 357 Magnum out of it, and introduced it in 1935, and it was at the time the most powerful handgun cartridge there was. So you have big game hunters and police saying, we want extreme power, the most powerful, most energy, and the military was saying, well, we just want big 45 bullet, doesn't have to necessarily be that powerful. So are they relevant in today's today's world. Now let's go on to the 357. 357, I would say yes, it's still very much relevant. It's still chambered in a lot of revolvers, even a lot of the newer revolvers that are for concealed carry, it's still chambered in it. And the interesting thing, when we look at like automatic cartridges that were in development recently, the big changes were the 40 caliber size cartridges. You had the 10 millimeter around the mid 80s, which evolved into the 40 Smith & Wesson, and then evolved into the 357 SIG. But the interesting thing is the 357 SIG basically matches the 125 grain Magnum that's been around for a long time, and they found that the 357 SIG is very effective. Well, we were doing that with the 357 Magnum for like 80 years already, so the development of the 357 SIG really isn't that much of a, it's not really anything other than putting a 357 Magnum in a automatic pistol rather than a revolver. But is it still relevant? Yeah. It's still number one for stopping power pretty much. I mean, there are other cartridges out there that claim that they have a high percentage of one-shot stops and a lot of street cred, but the 357 Magnum street credibility goes back over 80 years. So, you know, that kind of plays out to statistically being more reliable as far as a man stopper. 45 auto, let's just talk a little bit about the numbers here. A lot of people will tell you, and I don't know where these people get that information, but they'll tell you that the 40 is more powerful than the 45. And that's simply not true. When you look at the original loadings of this by the military, which was old information from over 100 years ago, yeah, 830, 850 feet per second on a 230 grain only comes out to about 350 foot-pounds of energy. The original loading of the 40, which is 90 years later, pretty much, is around 400 foot-pounds, so a little bit more powerful. However, you're talking 35,000 psi of the 40. This is like 21,000. Huge difference in pressure. And the 9mm, you know, people will basically tell you the 9mm is the same as the 45 in energy, and the 40 is more powerful. Well, let's look at a little bit of standard ammunition, standard modern ammunition nowadays, and you tell me. I took an example of the PDX-1 ammunition, and this is somewhat typical. I know that the example of 9mm is not as typical, but that's just what they happen to have loaded with the PDX-1. But energy numbers are pretty close to what's in a standard pressure 9mm. The 9mm PDX-1, 147 grain at 1,000 feet per second, or 326 foot-pounds of energy. That's close. 9mm NATO is more like 350 foot-pounds of energy. The 40 caliber PDX-1, 180 grain at 1,025. That's pretty common. 425 foot-pounds of energy. But the PDX-1 and the 45 auto was a 230 grain at 230 grain at 920 feet per second, 432. So the 425 foot-pounds for the 40, 432 for the 45. And that's really what you see across the board. You see kind of the similar thing, similar numbers here. When you just take around the mill 9mm, or even some plus Ps or NATOs, and you run them through standard like Glock 19 length barrels, a lot of times you'll get around 350 to 375 foot-pounds of energy. When you take 40 and 45, generally right around 425 foot-pounds standard pressure and pull. So the 40 and the 45 are actually pretty darn close. And when you push them up there, when you go to a plus P on a 45, you oftentimes, well, usually you're exceeding a 40 caliber's energy level. A lot of people say, oh, that's not fair. Well, whatever. But basic rundown of it, the 40 and 45 are roughly as powerful as each other in modern ammunition, and the 9mm is a little bit less powerful. Is it relevant, though? Is it relevant in today's world where we have a lot of high ammo capacity guns? Personally, I think it is. But I'm coming from a standpoint of somebody that carries a 5-shot revolver every day. So when I look at like an 8 or 9 shot 1911, I think, well, that's plenty. Sure, you get less ammo capacity in a 9mm, and it's heavier ammo. But when you look at, let's take for instance a concealed carry gun, single stack magazines. I think that the capacity that a lot of these 45s hold is okay. It's always going to be less than a 9mm or a 40 or a 10mm, but I think it's sufficient in modern times for the average person for self-defense. Now, law enforcement use, we've seen this time and time again with a lot of agencies, including the FBI. It's just, well, the 45 is just too big, it's too heavy, so they opt for 40 or they opt for 9. And I can understand that. But if you want to talk about other uses such as home defense where you're not carrying a gun, I think the 45 is actually a better choice than 40 or 9mm. Concealed carry, you're kind of getting in the middle there whether that's going to be a good option, because really in my perspective it's all about ammo weight. 45s do weigh down your gun a lot more than 9mm or 40. However, 40 is kind of in the middle for weight there. But I think, personally, the 45, across the board, all the different ammo choices you have, it really has the most consistency for stopping power. It's very consistent because it's already a large bullet. You see consistent performance, and you don't have a lot of the overpressuring issues that you have with other cartridges. So I think across the board, it's a good, reliable cartridge. The same as the 357 Magnum. You got very consistent performance. Tried and true. So they're tried and true. They really are. They're not for everybody, but I think that they are still very much relevant in today's world. I look at new creations such as the 10mm and the 357 SIG and the 40 as being kind of, I don't know how I want to put it, but basically if you can do whatever you would need a 40 to do with a 45. 10mm, well, you kind of can with the 357 mag do what a 10mm can do under certain circumstances, and kind of the same with the 45. However, you're never going to get as much penetration as you're going to need with a 45 against hard barriers. A 10mm is going to have more hard barrier penetration. If you look at like a 10mm, which I don't have one for example, it is kind of in between here. It is kind of the in-between. I wouldn't say 40 is the in-between. I think 10mm is really the in-between, because you push it up hot, and it's pretty close in energy to the 357 Magnum. 357 Magnum can match its bullet weight pretty much, go up to 180 or so. 45, kind of in a little bit different role, but I think if you had a 10mm or a 40, I think you could cover whatever bases you need to cover with these two instead of something like a 10 or 40. So that's just my opinion. I think they're very relevant, and a lot of people, they don't want to go to a 45. They think there's something better, but personally I think the 45 is still one of the best handgun cartridges out there. The only use that it might not be good for would probably be, protection against brown bears. Any other dangerous animal, it would do just fine. 357 mag, yeah, its role is pretty limited in law enforcement work, but average concealed carry homeowner, I think it's still very relevant. So enough of me rambling here. That's just my opinion on whether they're still relevant, and a little bit of history on these cartridges. So thought I'd share. So give me your opinions, comment, share, and like. And as always, thanks for watching.